Welcome back, everybody. It's response time. This one, a response to Johann Hari, who I like, who's written a lot about depression and anxiety and the roots of these, what has become known as the mental health epidemic. What I like about him is he offers a, hey, let's get to the root of the issue kind of mentality. Let's figure this out. He's not a psychologist, he's a journalist. So he sums up a lot of data and says, let's figure out the one moving part, the one place we could press in this fulcrum to get it to move. And he does a great job of that, talking about the relationship between anxiety, depression, and connection, to the extent that we feel connected to other people. But in this video, he makes a mistake. For whatever reason, we can speculate all we want, but he makes a mistake. There's a fundamental error in his argument here, which wouldn't be such a big deal, except this fundamental error, if it goes unchecked, will lead to a failure to understand mental illness, to understand emotional issues for what they really are, in this case depression, and so a failure to solve it. There is a mental health epidemic to some extent, and until we disabuse ourselves of the error that Johann Hari makes in this video, I guarantee it will continue. Okay, let's see what he has to say.
When I feel depressed, like loads of people, I say I feel down, right? And as I was learning about the causes of depression and anxiety for my book Lost Connections, I started to realize I don't think that's a metaphor. There's this amazing professor at Stanford called Robert Sapolsky, who in his early 20s went to live with a troop of baboons in Kenya. And it was his job to figure out when are baboons most stressed out. So his job was to hit them with little tranquilizer darts and then take a blood test and measure something called cortisol, which is a hormone that baboons and us release when we're stressed. And baboons live in this hierarchy, so the females don't, interestingly, but the men live in a very strict hierarchy. So if there's 30 men, number 1 knows he's above number 2, number 2 knows he's above number 3, number 12 knows he's above number 13, and that really determines a lot. It determines who you get to have sex with, it determines what you get to eat, it determines whether you get to sit in the shade or you're pushed out into the heat. You know, it's a really, really significant where you are in the hierarchy.
And here we have a first little indication of his error. He is in effect saying how experiment with baboons doesn't really apply to humans. They have a different hierarchy. It's very strict. Hierarchy among males, very strict. Once you're in your slot in the hierarchy, there's not as much, we may get to it, choice, decision that you can make to change your position. You have less control. Baboons may not, in fact, be humans. And anything we learn about baboon depression may not exactly apply to human depression. All right, continuing.
And what Professor Sapolsky found is baboons are most stressed in 2 situations. One is when their status is insecure. So if you're the top guy and someone's circling, which comes for you, you will be massively stressed. And the other situation is when you feel you're at the bottom of a hierarchy. You've been kind of humiliated. And what Professor Sapolsky found, which I think is really noticed and then it was later developed by other scientists, is when you feel you've been pushed to the bottom, what you do is you show something called a submission gesture. So baboons will raise, I say you, I assume no baboons are watching this, maybe they are. A baboon will put its body down physically, it will put its head down, it will put its bottom in the air, and it will cover its head. So it clearly seems to be communicating, just leave me alone, you've beaten me, okay, you've beaten me. And what lots of scientists have subsequently developed, people like Professor Paul Gilbert in Britain and Professor Kate Pickett and Professor Richard Wilkinson, also in Britain, have really developed is this idea that actually what human depression is, in part, not entirely, but in part, is a form of a submission gesture. It's a way of saying, I can't cope with this anymore, right? Particularly people who feel they've been pushed to the bottom of hierarchies, or who feel, remember the other stressful situations when you feel your status is insecure. It's a way of just going, okay, I retreat, I don't want this fight anymore. You've beaten me. It's a kind of very strong evolutionary impulse where you feel you're under attack to just submit in the hope that the stress and anxiety will then go away.
Right, well that would make sense if humans were baboons. If we as humans could only deal with our emotional issues to the extent that a baboon can, I'm not saying we have 100% free will. We don't need 100% free will. But do we have more free will? Can we have better insight? Can we have better perception of our consciousness than a baboon? Okay, then this research doesn't apply. Another reason this research does not apply at all is because what's different about human inequality and baboon inequality? Baboons are going after a finite resource. Status, social status, is a finite resource. Economic status, not a finite resource. Inequality does not mean poverty. Inequality simply means inequality. If this is the first time you've heard this, then you've only been looking at, maybe you've only been given a certain amount, a certain section, and a small section at that of the information. Now, is this really inequality though? Or is it a confounding variable? And I won't need to rely on any extraneous information for this. This is about to come from Johann.
The sources of the stress and anxiety will then go away. And one thing that's so important, Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson really developed this, is they've shown, so as inequality grows, depression and anxiety grow. They've shown this is a very robust effect, right? This helps us to explain it. If you live in Norway, your status is relatively secure, right? No one's that high, no one's that low. Movement between where you are is not so extreme. If you live in the United States, especially today, which is we're now at the greatest levels of inequality since the 1920s, there's a few people at the very top, there's a kind of precarious middle, and there's a huge and swelling bottom, right? So you can see why in the United States you've got more people who'd be showing a submission gesture, who'd be like, oh, Jesus, I've been beaten.
Well, just really quick here. Let me say that you might not want to use Norway or any other Northern European company as your benchmark for mental health. This is what people do who argue for more government intervention, is they say, hey, look at all the government intervention in Northern Europe and they're doing better than we are in America. Well, do yourself a favor and look up depression anxiety rates in Northern Europe. Okay, continue.
Than there would be in Norway. This is why inequality is one of the drivers of depression and anxiety, and why dealing with inequality reduces inequality and anxiety. It's one of the things that really shocked me, actually, was looking at, in the United States, the group with the lowest depression by far is the Amish. So
wait a minute, that's weird. Do the Amish have their own autonomous government? No, they live in America. So what is it? It's not just the inequality, clearly, because you are bringing up a population that has a higher poverty rate, twice as high at least as the rest of America, and they live in America. It's very unequal. A lot of people make more money than the Amish. So clearly it's not the inequality. This comes back to control. Inequality is fine as long as we're going after an infinite resource. Status in a baboon hierarchy is finite. All right, continuing.
I spent time with an Amish community. The Amish live in these homogenous groups which are incredibly equal. The richest Amish is worth as much as the poorest Amish, right?
So what's the solution here? It's clearly not more equality. Otherwise, so again, according to Johann and Hari's argument, the Amish would be more depressed. It's clearly not more money. Because, again, the Amish would be more depressed. This is about something else. This is about control. People need to feel controlled in their lives. And there's a way to do this when we understand our emotions for what they are. Particularly in the case of depression, we understand anger for what it is. We understand how anger relates with our depression. So we can figure out where it's coming from, what we need to do, how to become more in touch with the depression, how to talk through it in a correct way. Figuring out how depression works. Really, how it works for everybody. And from here, it makes it more natural to develop a universal therapy for all people that works in all situations, a one-size-fits-all approach to therapy. Really, it's possible, but we have to first look at emotions and how they work, and the more we compare ourselves with a monkey, the less likely that's going to happen.